I found out exactly what I meant to my husband's family the night they threw a dinner to celebrate my lottery win. Not me. Not my husband. The money. That was what they were celebrating. By the time dessert was served, my father-in-law had already given my winnings away. A new SUV for my sister-in-law. Startup money for my brother-in-law. A condo upgrade for himself and my mother-in-law. A family celebration fund. A retirement fund. Home renovations for people who had never once helped me pay a single bill. Everyone got something. Everyone except me. I sat there scrolling on my phone while they carved up my future like it was pot roast. Nobody noticed I wasn't upset. They thought I was quiet because I was soft. They were wrong. I was quiet because I was waiting for them to finish, so I could tell them the truth. I had already claimed every last dollar. It started with a text from the lottery office. 3 weeks earlier, I'd bought a scratch-off ticket at a gas station on my way home from work. I almost didn't buy it. I was tired, irritated, and mentally calculating whether I could put off replacing the broken bathroom faucet for 1 more month. But the machine was right there. So I bought one. Then I scratched it in my car and nearly passed out. After taxes, it came out to just under $540,000. Not mansion money. Not private jet money. But enough money to change a life if you used it right. Or ruin one if other people got there first. I made the mistake of telling my husband. That was where everything went wrong. His name was Evan, and if weakness could wear a wedding ring, it would look exactly like him. He wasn't cruel. That would have almost been easier. Cruel men make decisions. Cowards let other people make them for them. And Evan had spent our entire marriage letting his parents run his spine. So when I told him I'd won the lottery, his face lit up for half a second. Then he said the sentence that told me everything I needed to know. We should probably tell Mom and Dad. Not talk to a financial planner. Not pay off our debt. Not finally fix the plumbing in the condo we lived in. Not put money away for ourselves. No. Tell his parents. Like I had won the lottery on behalf of the family. I should have lied right then. Said I was joking. Said it was only $500. Said anything. Instead, I let him tell them. And 2 days later, his mother called and said, "Since this is such a blessing for the whole family, your father-in-law wants everyone together for dinner Sunday." That was the moment I knew they were already spending it in their heads. I just didn't know how shameless they were willing to be. My in-laws lived in a split-level house in the kind of suburb where people power wash the driveway before company comes over. When we pulled up that Sunday, there were already 3 cars in the driveway. His sister Melissa and her husband Darren had arrived. His younger brother Kyle was there too. So this wasn't a family dinner. It was a board meeting. I walked in carrying a bottle of wine I had paid for myself, and my mother-in-law, Sharon, kissed the air near my cheek like I had suddenly become somebody worth pretending to love. "Look at you," she said, "our lucky girl." Our? That word almost made me laugh. For 4 years, I had been Evan's wife. When she was annoyed with me, I was her. When she wanted something, I became family. Dinner was elaborate. Way too elaborate. Prime rib, garlic mashed potatoes, shrimp cocktail, a cake from the expensive bakery downtown. My father-in-law, Richard, was wearing a blazer. A blazer. The man normally dressed like the retired manager of a tire store, but tonight he looked like he was about to announce a merger. I sat down and checked my phone while everyone settled in. I was looking at the bank messages. 3 accounts. 2 transfers pending. A new safe deposit box appointment confirmation. Details that mattered. Unlike the nonsense I was about to hear. Sharon noticed me first. "Claire," she snapped, her smile tightening, "put the phone away. Richard is trying to say something important." I looked up. Richard was already unfolding a sheet of paper. Of course he had made notes. He cleared his throat like a politician, about to address the nation. "Well," he said, beaming, "now that everybody's here, we can talk about this wonderful blessing Claire brought into the family." Melissa grinned. Kyle finally looked up from his beer. Darren rubbed his hands together under the table so fast, I almost thought he was cold. Richard lifted the paper. "We've spent the last few days coming up with the fairest way to handle this money." The fairest way to handle my money. I leaned back in my chair and let him continue. "First," he said, tapping the paper, "Melissa and Darren desperately need a reliable vehicle. The Explorer is on its last leg, so we agreed that $40,000 should go toward a new SUV. Something safe, respectable, good for the kids." Melissa gasped like she'd just been awarded a humanitarian prize. "Oh my God, Dad, are you serious?" Darren put a hand over his heart. "That would change everything for us." Of course it would. They said that every time somebody else was supposed to pay for something. Richard smiled and kept going. "Kyle is 27 now. He needs a real opportunity, enough drifting around. So we think $100,000 is reasonable seed money for him to open his gaming lounge." Kyle sat up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "Seriously, Dad, I've been saying this. Esports is exploding right now. People would love it." He said this as if he had not been fired from 3 jobs in 2 years for showing up late. Sharon nodded proudly, like she was funding the next Apple instead of a future bankruptcy. "Your brother just needs someone to believe in him." Interesting. When I'd asked to borrow money 2 years earlier for my mother's emergency dental surgery, Sharon had told me, "Adults need to solve their own problems." Apparently adulthood only applied to me. Richard continued. "Melissa's house also needs work. The upstairs bathroom has had mold for months, so another $25,000 for home repairs there." Melissa pressed both hands to her chest. "Dad, no, that's too much." It was the kind of no that means yes before the sentence is over. Richard waved her off. "Nonsense. Family takes care of family." Then he got to the part that really told the story. "Your mother and I have also decided it's finally time to downsize into something more comfortable. No stairs, better neighborhood, maybe a condo with an elevator and security. We estimate around $275,000 down." Sharon jumped in immediately. "And we should put aside at least $50,000 for retirement and medical costs. At our age, you never know." Then Richard added, almost as an afterthought, "And maybe another $20,000 for a proper family celebration. A cruise, perhaps, something nice. This doesn't happen every day." I did the math in my head. They were over the prize amount. Not by accident. Because greedy people never stop at the number they have. They move right past it and start spending the number after that. I finally looked up and asked, very calmly, "Where exactly is Evan and my part in all this?" The table went quiet. Not because they felt ashamed. Because they hadn't expected me to ask. Richard frowned like I had interrupted prayer. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, "you gave Melissa and Darren a car, you gave Kyle a business, you gave yourselves a condo, a retirement fund, and a vacation. I was just wondering where Evan and I fit in." Evan shifted beside me. "Didn't speak." Of course he didn't. Sharon recovered first. "Oh, Claire, don't be like that. You're young, you have time to build. Melissa has children. Kyle needs help getting started. We're old. Our needs are more immediate." More immediate. I almost admired the nerve. Our condo bathroom ceiling had leaked twice in 6 months. Evan's salary had been cut the year before. I had been working full-time and freelancing weekends just to keep us ahead of credit card interest. But apparently we were young, so struggle looked better on us. Melissa cut in next. "Honestly, this isn't even about you versus us. It's about what's best for the family." Darren nodded eagerly. Exactly. Your win can elevate everybody. Kyle raised his bottle toward me and grinned. When the lounge takes off, I'll totally hook you guys up with VIP access. That was when I knew none of them would ever understand how disgusting they sounded. People like that never hear themselves. They only hear resistance. So I turned to the only person at the table who still had a chance to matter. My husband. Evan, I said, do you agree with this? Every face turned toward him. He looked at his father, then his mother, then Melissa, then me. And I watched him do what he had always done. Search the room for the least dangerous answer. Finally, he swallowed and said, I mean, I get where they're coming from. They're just trying to do what's best for everybody. That sentence ended my marriage. Not legally. Not that night. But in every way that mattered. Because there are moments in life when somebody shows you exactly where you rank with them. And if you ignore it, the next betrayal is yours. Sharon pounced the second he folded. See, Evan understands. He's not selfish. Melissa gave me a look like she had just won. Richard straightened the paper and said, We're not asking for permission, Claire. We're asking for maturity. Maturity. That was rich. They were 6 adults at a dinner table, trying to pressure one woman into financing their wish list. I set my phone face down. Then I said the only thing that mattered. You've all spent a lot of time planning where my money should go, but I'm curious, did any of you ever stop to ask whether I plan to keep any of it? Richard's expression hardened. As long as you and Evan are married, that money belongs to both of you. There it was. Not family. Not generosity. Not unity. Law. Or at least their version of it. Sharon jumped in right behind him. Exactly, half is Evan's, and as his parents, we have every right to help him think clearly. Help him think clearly. This from the woman who still opened his mail when we visited. I turned to Evan again. This was his last chance. Last. I'm asking you directly, I said. Do you want them making decisions about this money for us? His eyes were already panicked. He hated conflict the way some people hate spiders. He couldn't function if 2 people in a room were disappointed in him. So instead of answering like a husband, he answered like a son. Maybe we can just compromise. That was it. No spine. No loyalty. No us. Just compromise. A word weak people use when they want the stronger person to surrender politely. I nodded once. Then I smiled. That should have scared them. It didn't. Because they thought they were winning. Richard mistook my silence for defeat and kept going. In fact, he said, tapping the paper again, I think the cleanest way to handle this is to transfer the full amount into a joint family-managed account. Then we can distribute it properly and avoid emotional decisions. A family-managed account. I almost choked on how insane that was. Kyle laughed. Yeah, honestly, that makes sense. Otherwise, it'll just sit there. Sit there. My money. In my account. What a tragedy. Melissa leaned in and lowered her voice like she was doing me a kindness. You don't want to be the kind of woman who lets money destroy family. No. I thought. I don't. But I'm looking at 6 people who do. Aloud, I said, so just to be clear, you've all decided exactly how my winnings should be spent, and none of you thought I deserved a say. Richard's jaw tightened. We are giving you a say, right now. We're asking you to agree. Melissa scoffed. Normal people would be grateful to have this kind of support. Sharon folded her arms. You're acting like we're stealing from you. That was the first honest sentence anyone said all night. Because they were. Not with a gun. With guilt. With pressure. With the assumption that I had been trained too well to say no. And to be fair, for years I had been. When Evan and I got married, I really believed things would get better. That's the lie a lot of women tell themselves when a man is weak but gentle. You think kindness will grow into courage. It doesn't. Not unless he chooses it. And Evan never chose anything that would upset his parents. Not when Sharon criticized my cooking. Not when Melissa made jokes about my clothes. Not when Kyle borrowed money and forgot to pay it back. Not when my mother had surgery, and I asked if we could finally use some of the money Evan had been saving with his parents. That one still burned. Because I found out later Sharon had loaned money to Melissa for a kitchen remodel the same month. She told me there was nothing to spare. There was always something to spare. Just never for me. Still I stayed. Because leaving a disappointing marriage feels dramatic when nobody has technically hit you. When the damage is made of 1,000 little silences, people expect you to call it normal. So I stayed. And I adapted. And I learned. Especially after the lottery ticket. Because the moment I saw the numbers, I didn't just tell Evan. I also did something else. I signed the ticket. Took photos. Read every rule on the state lottery website. Called a claims office. And quietly asked what I needed to do to protect myself if family circumstances became complicated. The woman on the phone had probably heard crazier stories than mine. She gave me exactly what I needed. So while Evan was telling his parents, and Sharon was probably already choosing curtains for her imaginary condo, I had already met with a lawyer. Then an accountant. Then the claims office. And 3 days before that dinner, the money landed safely in an account with only my name on it. Not a joint one. Not one Evan had access to. Mine. Because something in me had already known. That dinner just confirmed it. Richard finally slammed his hand on the table. Well, we've all shared our thoughts. It's time for you to answer. I folded my hands in my lap. Actually, I said, I've been waiting for all of you to finish first. Sharon narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? It means, I said, I wanted to hear the full fantasy before I interrupted. Melissa inhaled sharply. Kyle muttered, wow. Evan whispered my name like a warning. Too late. I reached into my bag, pulled out a manila folder, and slid a document across the table toward Richard. He picked it up. Read the first line. And all the color drained out of his face. Sharon leaned over, then grabbed the paper from him. Melissa stood to look. Kyle came around the table. Even Darren lost the expression of a man trying to act neutral while waiting for free money. It was a copy of the deposit confirmation. Claim processed. Funds released. Amount deposited in full. My name. My account. Date stamped 3 days earlier. I let them stare. Then I said, very politely, I'm sorry, but I already collected the money. For one full second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the room exploded. What do you mean you already collected it? Sharon shrieked. Richard looked like he might have a stroke. That's impossible. The ticket's in my desk drawer. I almost laughed. No, I said. What's in your desk drawer is a copy. Melissa whipped around so fast her chair nearly toppled. A copy. Yes, I made one the day after I bought it. Richard stared at me like I had transformed into a different species. You tricked us. That word was fascinating to me. Because apparently when they secretly planned to drain my winnings, that was family. When I protected myself, that was trickery. I protected my own property, I said. That's not the same thing. Kyle was the first to say the quiet part out loud. So that means there's no money for the business. No. Melissa's voice rose so high it almost cracked. No SUV, no bathroom remodel. No. Sharon slapped the paper against the table. You selfish little bitch. There it was. The real her. No more our lucky girl. No more fake warmth. Just rage. Because greed stripped off her mask faster than honesty ever could. Evan finally found his voice. Claire, why would you do this without talking to me? I turned to him. Of everything said that night, that might have been the most offensive. Without talking to him. As if he had earned that conversation. As if, let my parents divide it up, counted as partnership. You want the truth? I asked. He stared at me. I didn't wait for permission. Because I knew exactly what would happen if I didn't. And then, since we were finally done pretending, I kept going. I knew your mother would call it a blessing for the family, I said. I knew your father would decide he had the right to manage it. I knew Melissa and Darren would suddenly have emergencies. I knew Kyle would have a dream that required 6 figures. And I knew you. I stopped on him. Would sit there and ask me to compromise while everyone carved me up. Nobody interrupted. Not because they respected me. Because I was right. I pulled a second set of papers from the folder. My financial records. Copies of transfers. A spreadsheet. A legal memo. I laid them on the table one by one. Here, what I actually did with the money. That got their attention. Of course it did. People like that always want one last chance to hear that they might still get something. First, I paid off my mother's medical debt. Sharon rolled her eyes. I ignored her. Then I reimbursed myself for every dollar I ever loaned Evan and never got back. Evan flinched at that. Good. Then I paid off my credit cards. Then I moved part of it into a protected investment account. Then I set aside a housing fund. Then I set aside taxes and legal fees. Richard stared at the papers like they were written in acid. Melissa crossed her arms. You moved the money already. Yes. Kyle asked, so what's left? I smiled at him. Nothing you're touching. That shut him up. Richard tried a different tactic then. Authority. Half of that money belongs to Evan. I nodded. That may be something the divorce attorneys discuss. That word hit the table like a dropped knife. Divorce. Suddenly, all the greed had to make room for fear. Evan actually stood up. Claire. No one else moved. No one else spoke. Because for the first time all night, the conversation wasn't about money. It was about consequence. You're divorcing me, he asked. I met his eyes. I'm divorcing a man who sat at a dinner table and let his family auction off his wife. His face crumpled. Not because he loved me enough. Because he hadn't believed I would do anything. That was the problem with people who survive on your patience. They think patience is permanent. I reached back into the folder and pulled out one final envelope. A separation agreement. Prepared. Organized. Clean. I slid it toward him. I met with an attorney on Thursday, I said. You'll get a fair settlement, more than fair actually, but this marriage is over. Sharon lunged for the papers. Richard caught her arm. Melissa started talking all at once about how I was overreacting. Darren kept saying, let's all calm down, which is what useless men say when they benefit from chaos but don't want to look like it. Kyle just kept repeating, this is insane. Maybe it was, but not as insane as staying. That was when Sharon lost control completely. She threw a water glass. It missed me and shattered against the wall. Evan flinched. Richard shouted her name. Melissa started crying, which would have been more convincing if she hadn't been asking for luxury car money 20 minutes earlier. The whole room collapsed into noise. And through all of it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness. Not yet. Just peace. The peace that comes right after you finally stop negotiating with people who were never going to treat you fairly. I stood up, picked up my bag, took the separation packet off the table, and placed it directly in front of Evan. Then I looked at all of them one last time. "I'm leaving now," I said. "The check for dinner should cover the meal. Think of it as my final contribution to the family." Then I walked out. Behind me, Sharon was screaming about the money. Richard was shouting my name. Melissa was saying this wasn't over. Kyle was swearing. And Evan. Evan was calling after me, in a voice that finally sounded desperate. It didn't matter. I kept walking. The air outside was cold. Sharp. Clean. I stood in the parking lot beside my car and just breathed. For 4 years, I had bent myself into shapes small enough to survive inside that family. That night, I unfolded. My phone rang before I even reached the highway. My best friend Nina. I answered on speaker and started the engine. "Well," she asked immediately, "did they lose their minds?" I laughed for the first time all night. "Yes." "Oh my God, tell me everything." So I did. The speech. The distribution plan. The SUV. The gaming lounge. The retirement condo. The cruise fund. By the time I got to Sharon throwing the glass, Nina was cackling. "I cannot believe these people." "Actually," I said, turning onto the main road, "I can. That's the problem. I knew exactly who they were." Nina got quiet then and asked the only question that mattered. "What about Evan?" I looked at the road, at the green lights, at the empty stretch ahead. Then I said, "He chose them." She was quiet for another second. Then she said, "Okay, then you choose you." I did. The next month moved fast. Faster than the marriage had ever moved. Once I stopped trying to save it, everything got efficient. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment 10 minutes from work. I moved my things while Evan was at the office. I changed my passwords, closed joint obligations, forwarded my mail. My lawyer handled the rest. Evan called, texted, begged, sent long messages about how he'd made a mistake, how he hadn't realized things had gotten that bad, how he wanted another chance. That part almost would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. Because men like Evan always wake up after the consequences arrive. Not before. Before they're confused. After they're devastated. I read every message. Answered only one. It said, "I gave you years to choose me in small moments. You waited until the big one and still chose wrong. I'm done." After that, I muted him. Not blocked. Muted. There's a difference. Blocked means anger. Muted means irrelevance. The divorce settled cleaner than his family wanted. Much cleaner. Because once Evan met with his own attorney and realized how bad it could get if he dragged it out, he signed. He got enough to restart. Enough to live. Enough that no reasonable person could say I had destroyed him. Which meant, of course, his family said it anyway. I heard through Nina, because gossip moves fast in suburban circles, that Sharon told people I had manipulated her son and stolen family money. Melissa was still somehow planning to get a new car. Kyle's gaming lounge never opened because dreams are harder to fund when you have to use your own money. Richard reportedly stopped mentioning my name at all, which was probably for the best. As for me, I did something radical. I got quiet. Then I got happy. I bought a small townhouse with a bright kitchen and no in-laws within driving distance. I paid off my debts. I helped my mother move into a better assisted living place. And then, for the first time in my adult life, I spent money on something that wasn't survival. I took a baking course. Not because it was practical. Because I wanted to. I had loved baking since college. Back when life still felt like it might belong to me. During the marriage, baking had become the thing I did late at night after everyone stopped needing something. A private joy. A quiet one. So with the money I had left, I turned that quiet thing into something real. A year later, I opened a small bakery. Nothing flashy. Warm lights. Good coffee. Lemon bars that sold out by noon. Cinnamon rolls the size of a fist. A line out the door on Saturdays. I named it Lucky Crumb. Because sometimes luck shows up as money. And sometimes it shows up as finally seeing people clearly. 6 months after the bakery opened, I saw Evan again. Not because I wanted to. Because he walked through my door. He looked older. Not dramatically. Just collapsed inward. Like life had finally made him carry his own weight. He stood near the display case for a second too long before I looked up from the register and recognized him. I didn't smile. I didn't frown either. I just said, "What can I get you?" He looked like that hurt more than anger would have. "You look good," he said. "I'm working," I replied. He nodded. Looked around. Took in the shelves, the customers, the chalkboard menu, the life I had built after him. Then he said, "I heard the bakery doing really well." "It is." He swallowed. "I'm glad." I waited. Eventually, he said the real thing he had come to say. "My parents are a mess." I almost laughed. Of course they were. Greedy people fall apart the second there's no one left to feed on. He kept talking. Melissa and Darren had bought a car they couldn't afford anyway. Kyle had racked up debt trying to launch another business idea. Richard's blood pressure had gotten worse. Sharon had borrowed money from half the neighborhood and was now pretending not to remember. Evan had moved to another city for work. Started over. Alone. None of it surprised me. I just looked at him and said, "I'm sorry to hear that." And I meant it in the same way you're sorry it rains during someone else's barbecue. As weather. Not heartbreak. He stood there for another moment. Then asked very softly, "Did you ever love me?" That one caught me by surprise. Not because I didn't know the answer. Because he still needed it. "Yes," I said, "that was the problem." His eyes filled. Mine didn't. Then I pointed gently toward the line forming behind him. "What can I get you?" This time he understood. "Just a coffee," he said. I rang it up. He paid. He left. And that was the whole ending. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just accurate. He became another customer. And I became someone he could no longer reach. Later that afternoon, Nina stopped by and brought flowers for the counter. She saw my face and immediately asked, "What happened?" Evan came in. Her eyes widened. "And?" I shrugged. "He got a coffee." That made her laugh. Then she set the flowers down, looked around the bakery and said, "You know what I love most about this?" "What?" That they really thought that money was going to change their lives. I looked past her at the front windows, at the afternoon light, at the handwritten menu, at the girl in the corner, booth eating a croissant and smiling into her laptop. And I said, it did. Because it had. Just not in the way they thought. It didn't buy them cars. Or condos. Or gaming lounges. It bought me a way out. And sometimes, that's worth more than hitting the jackpot.